Hello and good evening to everybody. It is the 22nd of December. Can you believe it? I should have put my party hat on, but I do have my Christmas earrings on. So this is program 62 of the Ammach Files. And as you know, this is peoplesinternetradio.com. And I have the wonderful Stephen Roberts helping me get this all out to you. So thank you very much, Stephen. Now, my guest tonight is the plasma physicist, Dr. John Brandenburg. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment or two, but thank you very much for joining us again. So, as you know, we've made it just a little bit after 11. Gosh, we're getting good at this. So just to pick up on things, Ammach, I wanted to just let you know that this is, in fact, the penultimate Ammach Files. Oh, I can hear the violins going and a big tear dropping there. But it is the last of, next week will be the last incarnation of me as the Ammach Files and the work I've been doing under that banner. Now, the reason for this is manifold, and some of you I have already explained in part on the show before. And it's essentially because the Ammach Files, the Ammach website got absolutely hacked to Hades, so that had to come down. The archive of it will be out there in due course, and next week I will reveal to you my new incarnation. So whilst the Ammach Files will be ending, after next week I am going to take a little break from broadcasting, and I'm not sure how long that will be, but be sure I will be back, as they say. So I want to tell you, also share with you about the event that happened on Saturday the 19th. It was a wonderful, though small and cozy affair, and it was the Ammach kind of end of year do. And one of the things I'd like to do is just do a shout out to Charmaine. Charmaine was one of the people attending, and just to say well done, because Barbara Lamb, along with her co-author Miguel Mendonça, have co-authored a book in which she features. Charmaine was on the show some many months back, and their book, which is newly published, I think it's out on Amazon, it's called Meet the Hybrids. So it is just out after about 8 months' work, and I think all of them, all of the participants, I think there, as I said, there are 8, I think they all did work with Barbara on the regression side. So this is breaking new ground in as much it is a book totally about hybrids. For those who are interested, you can go over and have a look at their work. So I think this is absolutely fantastic. And what else is really interesting that may come from hearing about Miguel's background is that I'm very interested in the ecology also of what's going on, not only on the planet, but also how the ET interaction impacts our ecology long term and where that takes us. And Miguel's background is in ecology, so I'm hoping that he is going to pick up that ball and run with that and put some material together, some research material that will actually explore that, and that definitely will be a first. So it was really exciting. We are, out of that little meeting as well, came a bit of a project. Now I'm just going to call it project, and it's going to sound funny, Purple Party. Now Project Purple Party, if people are interested in this, it's some energy work, and it's to do with energy work on the planet and for the planet. And it's very specific work, and it will be involving groups around specifically, initially anyway, the UK. And if any of you guys are piqued with your interest by that, then please send an email to amash@hotmail.co.uk. The things like the email will still be used for a while, but from the end of this month, there will be another email which I will give out next week, and also give you a little look behind the curtain at what is going on with the next phase of my development as the phoenix from the ashes, rising for another phase of development in my research with things that have been Ammach. But for now, I want to introduce you to Dr. John Brandenburg before we bring him on and before we play his song, which will be Lunatic Fringe Red Rider. But so let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. John Brandenburg. He is a plasma physicist, as I said, and he did his graduate work at California at Lawrence Livermore National Labs in controlled plasma for fusion power. He's also worked in defense energy and space research, so quite a diverse background. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, where we discovered water at the moon's poles, excuse me. The focus of Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two range forces of nature, gravity and electromagnetism. There is evidence, he says, also, for two, and this is our point of focus today, of two massive nuclear explosions on Mars that occurred above the Martian surface, and they were airbursts, turning large areas of the planet's surface into glass and leaving radioactive byproducts, which are still visible, he's reported. So we're going to talk about that and an awful lot more with the Cydonia Hypothesis, with Dr. John Brandenburg, right after Red Riders and Lunatic Fringe, which is, I think, probably quite apposite. Now, it starts off quite quietly, folks, so it's not that we've forgotten to turn it on. Be with you in just 3.5 minutes and we'll be back. Thanks for that. So hello and welcome back to the last of the Ammach Files before Christmas and the penultimate one of the series. And I have with me Dr. John Brandenburg. John, welcome to the Ammach Files. How are you?
Well, great honor, Joanne. Thank you so much.
John, just tell us where you are. I haven't told people where you are in the world.
I am in the middle of the Midwest, actually the
Okay.
north of the Midwest, in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okie dokie.
We're having a very warm winter here.
Yeah, we are here too. Very, very wet, I might say. I normally do a little forecast and say how the weather's been. It's been absolutely windy and horrible, and hence the hair.
Well, here we're having a very bizarre warm winter, and since I am a strong proponent that we must mend our ways and reduce our greenhouse emission gases, I tend to worry every time I see the weather doing something strange nowadays.
Well, I have one or two people.
I'm a political conservative, by the way, and I believe in global warming.
Well, I have some friends who absolutely believe.
Is that?
Sorry, John, I was just going to say I have some friends who absolutely believe that as they observe the activity of HAARP and the output of HAARP, so the weather changes. So they are really sure that with all the HAARP configurations around the planet, that's what it's to do with. So, but anyway, that's another story.
I'll tell you about the time I interviewed for a job at HAARP.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes. I asked them what it was for. And the answer I got was, we have all this natural gas in Alaska. It'd be a shame to just burn it off. We should use it for something.
Oh, well, but they have HAARPs everywhere. I mean, you know, Norway and anyway, around the planet. So
Yes. Oh, you ought to see the Russian one out in Siberia. It's absolutely surreal to see how large it is.
I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. So, John, perhaps you'd sort of indulge me and allow us to explore, as we did in our pre-show chat, something of your interest in the field. Not in, well, let's start with the UFO thing, because you were interested as a youngster in things UFO and somewhat ET. But tell us why.
Well, you must understand, in the United States, we were just bombarded with stuff about flying saucers and UFO. I was born in 1953, so all of my youth was dominated with news of UFOs and sightings and things like the Twilight Zone. I was watching some old, very fine episodes from there, and they featured flying saucers and UFOs constantly. So it was and it was also a time during the Cold War, so the military in this country was doing all sorts of things and not really telling the public what they were up to. So it led to a lot of confusion. The Air Force was launching these rockets full of an element called barium into the low Earth orbit and setting them off. They would make big explosions, and they would make these big green comets moving across the sky. And everyone would see them, and it would get reported in the newspapers, and then there would be this long wait for an explanation from somebody, and none would be forthcoming. The U.S. government figured if they wanted to do something, it was nobody's business what they were doing. And but there were a lot of UFO, honest-to-God UFO sightings in Oregon, where I grew up. I saw a quite spectacular one over my town. It was reported in the paper. Everyone else saw it too. And it was during the same period, I think it was 1967, where they were seeing what were the great swamp gas sighting in Michigan. That was labeled swamp gas by the Air Force.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was, so the government was not even being very artful in giving explanations for these things, and it was almost as if they were subconsciously revealing that they were hiding something important. So I was very interested in UFOs, but then the first animal mutilation started, Snippy the horse, and I remember investigating that to the degree that I could by reading up about it. And my mind recoiled in horror from that.
And John, were you in the location where that happened? I don't have to confess, I don't know about this particular case.
This occurred in a place called the San Luis Valley, which was later to become quite important to me. And I didn't realize that the connection between this horse mutilation and the location until later. But the San Luis Valley is a place in Colorado where the Rocky Mountains sort of splits in two. Rocky Mountain Range splits into two mountain ranges, one called the Saguache and the other called the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And in between them is this very interesting valley where there's been numerous UFO sightings and animal mutilations and things. So this occurred in 1967. And my mind, I was probably about 14 years old, 13, and my adolescent mind kind of recoiled from this, the idea that this could somehow be connected with UFO activity.
Is that what it was thought at the time, John?
Yes, it was in connection with a UFO sighting. So I decided, I made a mental decision, or that you could call it I went into denial, saying people from outer space, if they came here for many light years, would not do such things. And I should actually just accept the government explanation that this was all sightings of Venus and swamp gas and things like this. And then the government closed its official investigation into UFOs with the study from the University of Colorado, where the San Luis Valley is, and basically shut the book. They closed the book on it. And so, as a young person interested in becoming a scientist, I found that it was much easier just to put that out of my mind. Yeah. And in fact, it remained out of my mind completely until from 1967 to 1984, where I suddenly came face to face with it again. At that time, I was investigating what looked like archaeology on Mars. I was part of the independent Mars investigation team started by Richard Hoagland, and he's a brilliant fellow, and whatever his faults, he made the face on Mars as recognizable as George Washington on the $1 bill.
That's true.
And he was a great showman, and he basically brought it to the attention of the world that there was this face and a pyramid, and the recent pictures, by the way, show it's a face. In fact, I think I have you have a figure Um, I think it's labeled figure 20C.
Okay, maybe we can just put that up if we can, figure 20C, and just have a look at that. So, John, just whilst we're doing that, up until that time then, in your work, because you're a plasma physicist,
Yes.
And you must have come across other scientists, I imagine, well, I'm saying I imagine, I'm assuming, that would have touched on the fringes of that subject, or was it just so far out of your mind that that even wouldn't have impinged on you?
It was very far out of my mind until
Oh, okay. Sorry, John. We don't have.
well,
Sorry, I'm just looking at the images here. We don't have 20C for some reason. We haven't got that one. Is it just the face on Mars?
Just a picture of the face on Mars will do.
Okay, all righty.
And I'm sorry, I didn't number these maybe the way I should have. And but anyway, these are all recent pictures of the face on Mars, and you can see that it is a face.
There's a 21A or a 20A, I think we have.
That'll be fine. Oh, that'll be fine. Yes.
Yeah. All right.
That's
okay. We've
taken it in about 2007.
All right.
And you can see it's a face, and
Yeah.
it looks just like it did in 1976. And so and nearby it there's a pyramid shaped object, and so all of this is trying to figure out which one that would be.
That's figure 11 actually, I think, there, John.
Yes. Pardon me. I got.
No, don't worry. We just thought that this, when we're talking about something so visual, it is nice, even if people have to stop and start the video afterwards, to just have a quick look. So maybe.
Okay, yeah. Figure 11 shows the face is right next to a pyramid, and so. The whole subject of UFOs basically came up by surprise because we were investigating Mars, what looked like a dead civilization on Mars, and we discovered that we were being investigated.
How do you mean, John? Explain that.
Well, my then wife was active in what's called the sanctuary movement. They were trying to help refugees from Central America. And she would talk to various people in that movement who were actually hiding refugees from Central America. And their phones would sound strange. They would sound like an echo chamber, and you would hear tapping noises on the phone line. And so my wife mentioned this to me, and then her friend that she had talked to, she had heard these strange things on the phone line, was suddenly arrested by the FBI for hiding illegal refugees. And so she was quite upset about this, and she described what the phone sounded like, and I realized, oh, whenever I talk to the people at SRA, the phone sounds the same way when we talk about Mars. And so I realized our phone was being tapped, specifically conversations having to do with Mars. And I also became aware of this feeling that I was, being watched. And I worked at a government lab. I had a high security clearance, so I was used to dealing with secret things. And but this was much different than anything I'd encountered before. And so we finally, Carl Sagan, we were talking to Carl Sagan, and he asked us for pictures of some of the new stuff we were finding, and I sent those to him. And then talked to him a month later and said, "What did you think of the pictures?" And he said, "I never got them." And so we realized our mail was being intercepted, and so we couldn't understand why the government would be behaving in such a paranoid manner. They were treating these objects on Mars as if they were matters of great import in terms of national security. And that was when I remember thinking, you know, it's almost as if there is a UFO cover-up, and Mars is a sideshow of it, you know, because it's evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so that was the first time I thought, you know, maybe the government already knows there are extraterrestrial civilizations and doesn't want us to know.
Yeah.
Because we found this stuff on Mars, which even though it isn't a flying saucer, it's evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence close by to the Earth. And so at that point, I became aware of the possibility that the rumors might be true.
Yeah.
And so we proceeded with our investigation, however, and we presented our results at a scientific conference, and we discovered in the meantime that there was a Mars ocean. That was fun. And
so John, can we just explore the Mars ocean for a moment? Because there are some interesting points about that.
yes.
So I'll let you take the lead in that. I had been listening to you talking about it a little while ago, and I think that bears comment, because a lot of the people around us have a lot of knowledge about a lot of different areas here, and I think it would be of interest for them to hear what you had to say.
Yes, I believe there's a figure that shows a map of Mars with a blue area on the top.
Okay, yeah, we've got that one. So that's, I think that reads color image of, is that where it says color image of Mars and explosion area?
That's
John?
right. It shows also the areas where we found the evidence for the 2 nuclear explosions, but it also shows the Martian ocean in blue.
Okay, can we perhaps have that one up as well? So it's not, it doesn't have a figure number to it. It simply says color image.
I'm shockingly inefficient, Joanne.
Okay. No, listen, if I'd if I'd have been a little bit more organized, I might have relabeled them myself, but I didn't. So there we go. We're just working together. So
we're just working together.
Yeah. So hopefully we can put up the color pick. If oh, hello, I'm trying to type this as well, and I'm
sorry, I'm here, Joanne.
Well, anyway, we discovered the northern part of Mars had a vast smooth plains, and the face on Mars and the pyramid and other things were in these rocky areas right next to these smooth plains, and then we discovered that they were all at the same elevation. So it was a very simple inference to think, oh, it must have been an ocean, and this was on the shore of the ocean. And I've investigated further scientifically and found there was a lot of evidence for an ocean on Mars. So one Mars scientist, after our presentation in Colorado, asked us, why don't you just present something on the Mars ocean just by itself? And so I accepted that challenge and did so, and it immediately caused a great stir, though for a long time I didn't get any reference for it. They never gave me any priority on it. If you go to Wikipedia on the Mars ocean hypothesis, you'll see now that I'm reference number 1.
Oh, John, I say.
I know. But I became radioactive because of my involvement in the Cydonia investigation.
Okay.
I was a rogue element on Mars.
But John, I mean, back in '76, apparently, I mean, NASA kind of didn't take it up, but there was evidence from some findings that there had been water on Mars. Yes. Then, you know, and so on and so on. So when you came to it in 1984, what was the trigger point for you that brought you in?
Oh, well, there were several things. We found there was a common elevation line. For one thing, the Mars data was much better in 1984 They had made elevation maps of all of Mars, and we discovered that the transition in terrain from rough to smooth happened at the 0 kilometer, what they had arbitrarily called the 0 kilometer line. And also the estimates for water in Mars' atmosphere in the past had been vastly increased, so that there was enough water to cover the entire planet to the depth of 200 or 300 meters, and that was enough for an ocean.
Wow. Okay.
So we were aided very much by the increased scientific understanding of Mars, quite apart from the archaeology. The importance of the Martian ocean is that it is on the youngest geologically youngest part of Mars. It has almost no craters. Basically, you can tell how old the terrain is on Mars by how many craters it has. If it looks like the moon, it's very ancient. Has not had water or anything erasing it recently. If it's very smooth, it means that something has come through like water and erased it like a blackboard. So it's nice and smooth. The youngest part of Mars is where the ocean is in the north. That means that that ocean with liquid water and all that implies had to exist on Mars for most of Mars' history. That means Mars was Earth-like for most of its history. And this is a profound change in our view of Mars. We call this the new Mars synthesis because we've gathered data from probes, from rovers, from telescopes, from computer studies, from meteorites to form a new picture of Mars. We presented this in a special Mars issue for Journal of Space Exploration. It is just out. And so we have an image now, a concept of Mars that was very Earth-like for most of its history up until recent geologic times, say only 500 million years ago. That's recent geologic times.
Yes, I know. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. There weren't even cockroaches on this planet when Mars apparently met its end, and its climate became like it is now. So, anyways, we began to postulate. There were two theories. One was that Mars was colonized by some spacefaring species, and the other was that it had an indigenous, life and intelligence had separately evolved on Mars, like on Earth. I tended to pick the latter hypothesis simply because I thought it was more defensible scientifically. Other people accused me of being overly cautious, but I said no. Dead civilization on Mars built like people like us, that's certainly radical enough for me. And so we proposed, so I wrote the Cydonia Hypothesis. We published that in 1992. We were intending that it would be tested by new pictures. We predicted that if you take new pictures of the face on Mars and other objects, particularly a place called Galaxis Chaos, where there's another face, and that's figure number 40, by the way, is another face we found on Mars.
Okay, let's see if we can get number 40 up. Oh, actually, John, I did see that, so we'll just get that figure up. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Okay.
And in a cursory glance, I actually thought it was the face, the usual face. Well,
no, it's not.
No, it isn't. I can see now that it's not. And how many other faces are there that you think?
There may be one other face besides that. It's kind of carved into a hillside. Okay. But it shows that there was a widespread civilization on Mars. It wasn't just in one place. And this also was on the ocean shoreline.
Which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, the second face is at a place called Galaxis Chaos, and that is NASA's name, not our own. And when we first heard this new name, we already knew that NASA was aware we had found another face on Mars and apparently a ruined city nearby. And so it was as if their naming committee was aware of this and subconsciously had said basically that their galaxy was thrown into chaos by this.
Because, how did you refer to it before, John?
We called it utopia.
Okay, okay. And was that your particular name for it, or was that?
Oh, that was the area that it was found. It was found in a place near Utopia Planum.
Okay.
Plains of Utopia. So we called it just Utopia after the great science fiction novel by Sir William Moore in the 1500s or something.
Yeah. Yes.
And, so he wrote that novel called Utopia and was beheaded because of it, as I remember. Or that was something.
Gosh.
It was Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Henry VIII decided he loved the novel so much that he had it beheaded. I can't remember what. Anyway, that happens to people who get involved in things like this. And so I was always very aware of that. So I tried to be careful as I could be as a scientist. It doesn't, in fact, it's almost a wasted effort. There are so many scoffers and peewits around who rebel at the sight of anything new and alarming that it doesn't matter. You know, they would have gladly burned Galileo at the stake if they'd been allowed to. But instead, he was just confined to house arrest for the rest of his life. So, but anyway, we found this dead civilization, and then the question was, what happened to Mars? If Mars was Earth-like in the past, had an ocean, intelligence, a civilization, the civilization looked primitive to us, and we don't know the level of civilization. I will be perfectly honest there.
Okay.
What we're doing is using an Earth reference. We're basing everything on what we know.
I know that's always very tricky, but you believe it was probably some degree of competence as in the ancient Egyptians? I mean,
yes. The Egyptians were very competent. I know that we still can't figure out how they built the pyramids.
Or if they did.
I had an Egyptian student working for me, and he came in all looking grumpy one day, and I asked him what was wrong, because he was a very valuable person. And he said, I was watching this show called Ancient Aliens on History Channel, and they said the aliens helped us build the pyramids, he says. And that's not true, he said indignantly. He said, we did it ourselves. So, and I also had a Mexican-American student working for me, and I called them both my pyramid builders. They were both very, very competent young men helping me teach class and grade papers and things. So, so we had found what looked like a dead primitive civilization on Mars. The question then was, what happened to Mars? Now, near Cydonia, where the face on Mars is found, there is a large impact crater, as big as the Chicxulub crater on Earth that caused the destruction of the dinosaurs. And this happened on Mars also in recent geologic time. So for a while we thought, oh, well, an asteroid plowed into Mars and destroyed everything. Now Mars is smaller than Earth. It's only half the size of Earth, 1/8 the mass. It was conceivable, because Mars is next to the asteroid belt, that this would be enough, since Mars is farther from the sun and it is a smaller planet, that a Chicxulub sort of event on Mars would have destroyed Mars' climate and wiped out all life there, or most of the life there, that there would be only a tiny remnant. So that actually kind of gave us a nice, satisfying theory, you know, for why Mars was in a bad place in the solar system to try and have a big civilization, and that they had gone the way of the dinosaurs on Earth. However, as in the Sherlock Holmes story, the dog did not bark there was one little detail that was unsettling about this interpretation, and that was the Martian atmosphere was loaded with a peculiar isotope called xenon-129. And I was working at a government laboratory where they did a lot of nuclear weapons work at the time. And I was standing in line. In those days, we Xeroxed everything. So we were standing in line at the Xerox machine in the library. And I was chatting with this one scientist, and who was apparently an expert on nuclear weapons. And I was discussing the Mars isotopes with him, that they were very peculiar. They were very different from Earth. And he said, "Oh, can I see that?" So I showed him the article and pointed out the predominance of xenon-129 over all the other isotopes, whereas on Earth it is equal to like xenon-132. And he suddenly he lost his smile and looked at me in kind of horror and said, "Someone nuked them." And he was when you work at a government lab and people have various security clearances and there are various compartments, you know, so you're not supposed to know what people in the next office are doing, actually. And he suddenly excused himself after that statement and walked out of the library. And I knew from experience that meant he had said something classified and was excusing himself because he had, you know, he had spoken out of school. He was talking about something classified in an unclassified area. The library was unclassified. So that kind of haunted me. And but it was one of those weird, it was one of those weird details that did not make sense. We had a fine story, you know, Joanne.
Yeah, indeed.
We had the person died of natural causes. Get them into the ground and publish their obituary. We'll have a fine funeral for them, and you know, we had a nice story with a ribbon tied around it, and this pleased everyone. So that's how things sort of remained until the database for the solar system became more complete. In particular, they parachuted a probe into the planet Jupiter and sampled all the isotopes there. And the isotopes looked just like Earth. The xenon-129 was the same as the xenon-132, just like on Earth. And I'd also become aware in meteorites that you could sample the xenon there, and it looked just like Earth. And the solar wind coming from the sun, if you sampled it, the xenon in it looked just like Earth. So Mars suddenly became much more anomalous because of this. Yeah. And I remembered, I was quite haunted by this one person's statement that this was a nuclear weapon signature, xenon-129. So, I
mean, that's huge, isn't it? I mean, that's sort of adult.
Yes, that changes everything.
The brain, and you think, well, what could you know, could it be an electric universe event? Could it be, you know, yes, two massive plasma events happening above it? And yes, you know, could that happen?
Unknown phenomenon, a big plasmoid ejected from the sun, colliding with Mars, making a lot of nuclear fusion in the atmosphere, something like that. But as it turns out, the xenon-129 does not come from fusion. It comes from massive amounts of fission of uranium or thorium.
Right.
And part of my education at Livermore Lab, I was working on laser fusion for a while. I was working on tokamak type plasmas, but also I did it for a while, worked on laser fusion, which is trying to make miniature hydrogen bombs. So I was given, a basic education in nuclear weapons design and how they operated. And I was aware that a standard hydrogen bomb in the arsenals of the Soviet Union, the United States, and every place, they will take a hydrogen bomb and they will wrap it with uranium or thorium. so that the fusion neutrons, the neutrons released by fusion, will actually go out and split the normally inert thorium and uranium and add to the force of the explosion. And they will also create a lot of xenon-129. What happened was the change in the Earth's atmosphere due to nuclear testing had been published in the meantime. It was published in about 1992. And you could see that part of the Earth's atmosphere had changed. Xenon is a very small component in the Earth's atmosphere and the atmosphere of Mars. It's a rare, what's called a noble gas. It doesn't react with anything, so it just stays in the air, and it preserves kind of the history of the planet in the record of the isotopes of xenon. And on Earth, there was this enormous spike in xenon-129 due to nuclear testing in the air. We were testing all these hydrogen bombs out in the Pacific, and the Russians were testing them. And this had created a lot of xenon-129. And so, armed with this data, I compared the Mars atmosphere with atmospheric xenon with Earth's xenon due to nuclear testing, and I believe that's figure number 3.
Okay, so I don't know whether you heard that.
So either figure,
I'll get it, yes.
Like figure 2, 3, 4 shows comparisons between Mars and and the nuclear component of the Earth's atmosphere. We've changed our own atmosphere because of nuclear testing.
Yeah,
in fact, anyone from outer space, if they sampled Earth's atmosphere, could probably tell that we'd done a lot of nuclear testing, as if they didn't know from the electromagnetic signals.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're just putting those up for people to have a little look at as well.
So it shows should be Mars versus fission xenon.
Okay.
And you can see that the two look like a fairly good match. In fact, if you mix the bomb xenon 50-50 with ordinary xenon on Earth, you get a very good match to Mars. So, because then you have an amount of xenon-129, you can actually calculate how big the bomb had to be to have done this. What was the nuclear energy release?
Yeah.
And it's enormous. It would have been a bomb as big as the Dubai Tower.
So what would that have been in, just to give us a figure, what would it have been in tons? You know, they talk about bombs in megatons, don't they? Or
this would have been a billion megatons.
Billion?
Yes.
Oh, God.
I know. Well, it goes as the cube of the size.
Right.
And so this explosion would have torn the entire atmosphere of Mars off of the planet. It would have utterly devastated. It would have sterilized the entire planet. In fact, it was so large, it meant that if this was done by some intelligent force, someone wanted to not only destroy the civilization on Mars, but to sterilize the planet so it could really never have life on it again.
And you said there were 2 such explosions of the same magnitude?
Yes. Well, figure 8 and figure 9 show patterns of radioactivity on the Martian surface.
Okay, let's see if we can get up 8 and 9. So let's just see.
Discovered by Mars Odyssey.
Okay, sorry, just go back to that, John. 8 and 9, sorry, showing us what there again?
And you can see 2 red spots.
Yeah, indeed.
And those apparently were the sites of 2 massive nuclear explosions. We also recently discovered those 2 sites are covered with what looks like a glass. So they were glassified.
Okay, so the second one looks quite a lot smaller, but I don't know what small is. I mean,
yeah, well, it was probably 1/4
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
size of the first one. And then you can see there's a pattern of yellow. That's kind of debris from the explosions. And that
Uh-huh.
wraps around the planet and to a place called the antipode from the larger explosion, where there's another smaller pile of radioactive debris. Indicates the shock wave wrapped all the way around the planet, collided on the far side. So the entire planet was devastated.
So, John, when you heard or realized this, I mean, this is a kind of it's a huge thought, a huge thing.
Yes, it is.
Did did you was the only option available an attack? Was there any way
Well,
this could have happened
I,
at all through any other route?
of course, my mind rebelled from this conclusion. I thought that possibly it could be explained by natural nuclear reactors on Mars. In Africa, there were natural nuclear reactors in the ground, in uranium deposits, and the water would, groundwater would get into the uranium deposits, and it would form a natural nuclear reactor with moderation, water moderation. And this happened a billion years ago. It happened in 20 separate little spots. And so it was easy to imagine that something like that could have occurred on Mars, only this was much larger perhaps and went unstable and blew up. But so I actually went to conferences and presented that idea, and it was well received. Other scientists said, well, if there were natural nuclear reactors on Earth, there had to have been natural nuclear reactors on Mars. However, I became aware from the comments of various other scientists that the xenon-129 was not the product of a nuclear reactor. So that was one problem. In other words, the devil was in the details. Mm-hmm. The most important detail was xenon-129 was not produced by nuclear reactors operating in
and it definitely couldn't be found anywhere. And I'm just looking at this electric universe model as well, because of course there can be vast tracts of vitrification of material or matter caused by the electrical.
Every time a lightning bolt strikes, it actually vitrifies the soil. Okay. So you can imagine perhaps it was a large cosmic lightning bolt hit Mars. No, unfortunately, the explanation, Sherlock Holmes said it best. He said, when you have eliminated all the possibilities that don't match the data, then the final one, no matter how seemingly improbable, must be the truth. And so I was forced gradually by the fact there were no craters at the sites. Whatever happened on Mars, it blew up in midair. And it involved an enormous amount of fission, not just fusion.
Yeah.
The Mars meteorites we get from Mars, the younger ones show evidence of being bombarded by high-energy neutrons as it created in a hydrogen bomb. So that evidence was there. There were no craters at the sites. Whatever happened was not a natural nuclear reactor in the ground. If it had blown up, it would have created a big crater. No. Mm-hmm. It blew up in midair. And it didn't have just fission in it. It didn't have just fusion energy. It had fission. And that finally, and it created a lot of xenon-129, like earthly nuclear explosion. So the only thing that matched this was massive nuclear explosions like on Earth in midair. They were the weapons were so large. Instead of finding a lot of little spots of radioactivity, we found two big ones. So this meant the bombs had to have been dropped from outer space. So here you have a rather pathetic picture of a primitive looking civilization on a small planet, and it looks as though somebody from space came along and dropped 2 massive hydrogen bombs on it with the intent of destroying not only the people on the planet, but the entire biosphere. So it was a quite terrible conclusion to arrive at. It caused me great mental distress. And but my friend Vincent DePietro urged me that I must publish it. It had to be known.
Did the government know what you were doing at this time? You know, because you were obviously plugged into them, and you know,
yes,
the defense element.
Oh, we informed the Pentagon. We informed the Defense Department when we discovered this.
And were there conversations about that? Were there?
Well, the conversations were basically one way. We had discovered someone, a government agent. He was posing as an astronomy professor, but he was actually a government agent. And Washington, D.C. is a small town in these sorts of circles. And we were at a conference, and this fellow had accompanied us. We enjoyed his company. He was very smart. He was a PhD and in physics and astronomy, and he was standing next to us at a Mars conference, and an Air Force officer, a full colonel, came up to us, introduced himself very graciously, and turned to our companion and said, "Hello, Larry, how are things at the Defense Intelligence Agency?" And I think that this was a little bit of rivalry between Air Force intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency, and stories of petty bickering between the defense agencies in our country are legendary. I won't go into them. But one of my friends who worked for an intelligence agency said that he announced that the next day we were having a beer together, and he announced that the next day he would go down to battle the forces of darkness and evil. And I said, "Who are they?" And he says, "Well, darkness is the CIA and evil is the DIA." He worked for the U.S. Navy, was part of naval intelligence. So anyway, so I'm sure nothing like that ever happens in Great Britain. Things are run.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not privy to it, though.
But anyway, so we had discovered this fellow was a government agent. So we basically just called him up and said, "Larry, we have to show you this. Please report it to your superiors." We dispensed with any pretense that he was an astronomer. We just said, "Okay, you're a government agent. Report this to your superiors that we have found this." And so he did. He listened and took very careful notes. I gave a whole presentation to him in a conference room at a government, at a contractor where I worked. He disappeared. We didn't hear from him for 6 months. And then through someone else, another contact with the Defense Intelligence Agencies, there came back the answer. And this was, as usual when dealing with them, it was a question. Why don't you publish this? So basically we were being told to publish. So we did. First, that we opted for the natural nuclear reactors because people would accept that idea. Then we found out that that didn't match the facts. And so I eventually just published the full hypothesis. And I've had 2 people be very critical. I've challenged them both to debate on a radio show that would host this debate, and both of them have declined, saying they didn't know enough about the subjects involved. And I said, well, it's a very ironic statement considering you're so critical of my work. So I've heard that I haven't heard anything from them either now.
Oh, well, John, if I can arrange anything along those lines, I'll let you know. That would be great.
Tell Stephen Hawking I will gladly debate him on this matter.
Yeah.
Actually, the picture of the universe that emerges is very close to what Professor Hawking has proposed, where the most dangerous thing for intelligent life in the universe may be other intelligent life, that we should be on guard.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, have you, from these, so just remind me of the year that this, was this back in 84 that you had this?
No, no. I did not become certain of all of these matters till about, I'd say the year 2000.
Oh,
No,
okay,
actually,
sorry.
or like 2002, I actually had all the data in front of me on the table and could figure. I also, by the way, had the expert advice of nuclear weapons experts. I showed it to them and they agreed with me, my interpretation. Right. So I felt quite confident that the evidence was strong. So then, you know, it took me a long time to basically write it all down in a book.
Yeah, yeah.
First, Joanne, I will tell you frankly, quite honestly, the effect on me personally was quite devastating at first. Yeah. I started having nuclear war nightmares. I felt that I was slipping into a almost clinical depression.
I mean, and John, I mean, that's quite an extreme response to the information that you found. I mean, is it because you just realized that, you know, this could have been us or it could have been you at some point, and, you know, how close that felt to you? Was that?
Well, I'm the proud father of 3 children. I have 2 grandchildren. I want their future to be safe.
Yeah.
I remember I had actually been staring at the artifacts on Mars since 1984. I felt like I'd walked Mars in my dreams, that I had actually talked to people from Mars, you know. I felt quite close to the idea of a Mars civilization. And then to find out that it had met such a terrible end was really quite shocking. So anyway, I'm religious, so I basically found solace in my religious faith. Okay. And also in the same vein, I found the courage that I should go forth and put this forth, that it was the truth, as near as I could understand it, and that I was supposed to do that. That was
okay, well, listen, John, we've got 1 or 2 questions, but I'm going to start the next session. We're going to give you a little break, and we're going to play Moody Blues and question.
How about the Knights of Cydonia? By
I should have got that one queued up, but we'll give you a little bit of break there, John. So we're going to play Moody Blues and question, and we'll be back with a couple of questions for you too, John. Thank you very much so far. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, hi, folks.
Turn your video back on, Joanne.
Hang on, let me just get the camera back on. Hi, folks. Sorry about that. I thought I'd lost myself for a moment there.
Oh, that's much better.
I was just thinking, gosh, Skype's behaving a little bit today. I spoke too soon. So, John, just to go back to, there was a question earlier on in the chat, and if you can just bear with me, I shall just go back to it. It says, with your background in plasma research, do you believe man can travel through the Van Allen belt? What's your opinion, John?
I not only believe it, but we did it, my nation did it about 8 times.
You think so?
Those astronauts, they had a shielded capsule, and they went through the Van Allen belts very fast. It was the fastest part of their journey, so they got very little exposure to radiation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there were also conversations, I remember at the time, saying, well, we must have some kind of classified system for shielding the astronauts from radiation, because they don't seem to be, everyone used to say they were very worried about that, and then suddenly here's our astronauts whizzing through the Van Allen belts as if they're not even a problem at all. And
Yeah.
so it's a combination of speed and apparently classified radiation shielding.
Oh, okay. That's always been a big issue for the ones, you know, who say that we didn't actually get there, at least not at the time when it was said that they did.
They should. Those people should check out the explosions of the Russian moon rocket. They should actually be asking why the Russians, who were very capable, very brave, did not go to the moon themselves. Instead, they attempted to go to the moon right up until the very last, but just couldn't do it. They were very brave. The cosmonauts were going to land on the moon in what looked like basically a phone booth, and with almost no preparation or testing of their equipment. But they failed. The United States then did, I'm a little embarrassed to say, 6 victory laps. So we did 6 victory laps after going to the moon, and the Russians never did make it there. They're still upset about that. This, by the way, really, if anyone knew that we didn't go to the moon, it would have been the Russians. But they, you notice, they never said anything about us faking the moon trips. They were monitoring all our communication links. So they had landed probes on the moon themselves. So they knew how to get to the moon. They just couldn't do it.
Yeah. John, there's another question as well, and that's about the camera film. How on earth could that survive the radiation?
Oh, they put it in lead-lined cases. I mean, you know.
Okay.
I mean, you know, the Van Allen belt is full of electrons and protons, and those are fairly easy to stop because they're charged particles. Gamma rays, on the other hand, you know, go through things, but protons and electrons are fairly easy to stop in metal, because they are charged. So as a physicist, you know, I asked, someone protested to me, how are we sure that we went to the moon? And I finally became flustered and I said, are you even sure there is a moon, sir? This caused this fellow to go into almost a catatonic state. Wondering if he was sure there was even the moon even existed. Because all he could do was see it. You can't touch it, you can't taste it, and is that proof enough that there's a moon, that you can see it?
Yeah, indeed. I know about those arguments too, and that takes us down another road.
I remember
that for another time.
Earth Society still have its headquarters in Great Britain.
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
Does not the Flat Earth Society still have its headquarters?
Yeah, that's a bit of a sore point, right?
I know. Well, I understand.
No, we're not. This is not the home of flat earthers. We're not flat earthers.
Well, you know, we have to be open-minded, and for some people, the idea that we actually went to the moon is quite frightening, and they can't accept it.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much anything to do with fear. I think it's just the technology, and you know, and then you've got people like Jay Weidner and Stanley Kubrick telling their stories, you know, about how it could have been faked and why. And anyway, it's not to say that it never happened. It's just to say that, you know, there's lots of muddying of the waters there.
Well, we're going to go back there. We're already orbiting it with all sorts of things, and the Chinese have landed there. The Chinese are going to try and go to the moon here pretty soon, just to show that they are our technological equal, even if it is 40 years in the been 50 years. Yeah. They're going to show that they have excelled in that area. So,
John, let me just, sorry, let me just get this other question. It's from Davey again up in Scotland there. And he says he had a really big close encounter with a UFO. In 2009. In fact, it was Christmas night, and he said he just wants your opinion on something. He said it started off as an orange ball, and as it came down to them, him and his wife was there. There might have been another person there, but anyway, definitely he and his wife. He said it blossomed out into a huge mauve, purple, cobalt blue, pink, sphere, like a ball with a rotating plasma field around it, as it was accompanied by a really loud whirring sound. Do you have any idea where this might have come from, or any other ideas about it?
Well, many people report during UFO sightings what looks like plasma effects. And I also work on Mars was something of a diversion for me. My main focus of my scientific career was not just fusion energy, but also unifying gravity and electromagnetism. This is the great Einstein problem that he worked on for 30 years. So if you're going to have a craft that doesn't need propellers or jet engines to fly, you have to be neutralizing gravity somehow, and this requires apparently very strong electromagnetic fields. So that would easily ionize the air, and you'd get all sorts of. One of the things I did for the Air Force as a scientist was to make ball lightning. We weren't allowed to call it ball lightning, so we came up with another name for it, PIA. And we made it in microwave ovens, and then we finally scaled up, and we were finally making it as big as soccer balls. And this was, a ball of plasma in full air density. We, in fact, got welder sunburn from it. It was quite dangerous. But we were able to make things like this fellow saw, and using powerful electromagnetic fields.
And what do you think of that? Well, I mean, he's quite clear that for him it was a UFO, and probably intelligently,
Sure.
Driven or piloted. I'm not quite sure, but what's your view of that kind of technology as well? Because I'm imagining that you must have seen some of that in your growing up time in
yes,
Oregon.
the craft I saw in 1967. It was just one, and it was a glowing disc with a silver tail fin. And I looked at it through binoculars. So did my mother. We were handing the binoculars back and forth between us, and many other people saw it. It was reported in the newspaper, and it had a very rainbow iridescent effect on the body, the disc, and then there was this silver tail fin sticking up out of this iridescence. And after a while, after watching it for like 15 minutes, I remember thinking, well, I better go do my homework. And,
so have you, sorry, John, I was just going to say, have you actually had any encounters with any of the occupants?
No, I haven't encountered any extraterrestrials that I know of.
Right. Okay. All right.
I did write a nice dark novel based on my experiences in Washington, D.C., working for 15 years with the Pentagon and hearing all sorts of rumors, and walking down the hall and overhearing conversations, etc. In fact, I was advised not to talk about that, as if not to talk about what I'd heard, but if I wanted to write a science fiction novel about it, that would be fine. So I wrote a science fiction novel called Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. In fact, I sent you guys a picture of the cover.
Okay. All righty. Yeah, we should.
It's the last email I sent, and you may find a picture of it.
Okay, we'll see if we can find that one. But in the meantime, John, so what were you writing about when you said the end of the UFO cover or cover up? Are you expecting?
It's a what-if novel, and
okay.
It deals quite frankly, and some people said quite brutally, with the phenomenon of abduction, cattle mutilations, and human mutilations.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my friends, many people read it and loved it. One of my friends, though, tried to read it and said, "John, I can't finish it. It's too dark." And I said to myself, "Yes, I have succeeded in writing a dark novel." And I basically talked to a lot of abductees. I had gained a certainty from working in Washington, D.C. that there was a UFO cover-up.
Sure,
And,
no doubt about it.
So I learned as much as I could about it. In fact, I would go to UFO conferences, and I would see government agents there.
Oh yes, honestly, it's well known that they're there. You know, I've been a couple of times to
the... actually supporting the conventions because they buy so many tickets.
Well, I went to a couple of the conventions over there in your country, and you know, one of the things that would always be said is look out for those guys, you know. Not that they were waving to you or anything, but...
I walked into a bar, and there were two very fit-looking fellows actually wearing berets.
Oh.
They weren't green, but they were. They looked like two of the military people I had dealt with at various meetings in Washington, D.C. So I sat down and joined them for a drink, and we were yakking, and it was great fun. And so I wrote this novel, which is a what-if novel. Suppose it was true that the middle of the Cold War, the U.S. government had made an agreement with aliens from outer space. And what would be the outcome of that kind of arrangement? And in the novel, it turns out very badly.
I mean, is this sort of going on the back of the Eisenhower kind of Treaty of Greada kind of idea? And
yes, or remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the government has this secret little love fest with the little aliens from outer space, and so in the novel that actually occurred. This, as I said, it's a what-if novel, and but in the end, the U.S. government officials charged for dealing with the aliens and overseeing the abduction program and everything basically switched loyalties from the U.S. government to the aliens. They and so they end up. By the way, did you get the picture of the cover?
I think we've got that. I think that may be up.
Okay, great.
I think it is.
Sorry, I grabbed it right off of the Amazon website. And the subtitle is Absolute Secrecy Creates Absolute Power. And you know that what absolute power does to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this was a kind of a theme of a breakaway civilization, a secret government cabal.
Okay.
Completely.
So these are this is all sort of based on the rumors and whispers of Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon. And what about just picking one of the topics there that isn't spoken of very much, but it's something that I'm interested in exploring further in the future, and that is the human mutilation element. Did you come across much information about that?
No, I talked to some people who had tried to investigate that and had met a complete brick wall. So those things, if they occur, are very quickly covered up by the government.
Yeah.
At least in a science fiction novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wrote it under a pen name. So I have these two brave women journalists, such as yourselves, also equally lovely. And they bring down the UFO cover-up. They bring it down.
Well, there's lots of talk around about how that may even actually happen in our lifetime. So who knows? It's a watch this space. So let's just talk about the Cydonia hypothesis. So
yes.
Where are you with that now? So how far down the road have you got with any further? So if it happened in you came to that awareness in 2002, and we're sort of 13 years down the road now, nearly 14. Where is this going for you? Is it developing in any way?
Not so much, because in a sense, what I've done is I've been concentrating mostly on the nuclear data to make sure that The hypothesis that these were nuclear weapons is well supported by the data. We now have evidence from the krypton, which is another gas that's formed during nuclear explosions. And we now have amassed scientific evidence showing that the krypton gas isotope spectrum on Mars is also peculiar. It's quite different from Earth. And we found out that the reason it is different is because Mars suffered an enormous irradiation of neutrons, and that this has caused the krypton isotopes to be skewed. So I would say that I'm quite satisfied at this point that the Mars civilization did exist. Oh, there has been some recent activity by the government, surprisingly enough. They've been releasing more pictures. And
Okay.
these pictures can be seen on my website. I wish I had shipped them to you. Perhaps I could still do that. But on the pyramid on Mars, there's what looks like a doorway. It's a small square area.
Okay, let me just see if I can.
Maybe I can even ship that to you.
Okay, well, you can actually put it in the you can put it in the Skype
No,
chat,
just tell
John.
me where at on the site, John.
On the this is on the lifeonmars.pub.
Yes.
Okay, there is a new article called "New Data from Mars," and it talks about what's called the Aztec head, and the fact that let's see, let me just access that. This is quite marvelous. It's new
Okay, it's
data.
up there now, John. We've actually got that up. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
If you go down on that, you find there's what's called the Aztec head, and this is I tell my students in aerospace that one of the most important laws of physics in the universe is Murphy's law. The fact that if something is going to go wrong, it probably will go wrong. And the Aztec head, and there's actually better pictures, some people have enhanced it much better than I have, is there. We've found a second picture of it. And basically, they landed the rovers on Mars as far away from Cydonia and Galaxis as possible.
I wonder why.
They did not want any strange objects popping up in their pictures. But the civilization on Mars was quite extensive. And so anywhere you go along the coast, and the places they landed the rovers on the coast, apparently just because of Murphy's Law, they actually ended up photographing something inadvertently that looks definitely artificial. And there have been several objects that have been spotted on Mars that look artificial. But so there's the Aztec head. I found a second shot of it and was able to enhance it with false colors. You can see the teeth in blue, red, and green, and yellow as you page down. But then there is the pyramid on Mars, and it looks like it has a small doorway on it. Can you see that?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, as you page down there, it looks like a small square doorway on the pyramid, on one of the faces of the pyramid, about 3/4 of the way up the side of the pyramid. That is apparently a place where brickwork has broken loose from the pyramid and formed a small landslide. Then the bricks broke away in a rather square pattern, as they do sometimes when bricks fall off buildings. And now the government has zoomed in on this area and taken 2 new pictures of it, and they've released them, and they're quite remarkable. They both show the collapse area or doorway, whatever it is there. They are strongly confirming that, and the government just released those recently. So it seems as though the U.S. government wants this to come out.
Okay. Well, let me just ask you a question again. This is from the chat room from
Sure.
Unique Lee, and he says, "Have you considered? Has your guest considered? I guess he means how the Martians ended up post cataclysm and brought that schism with them." Sorry, actually, uniquely, I'm not sure about that question. I'm reading it and it doesn't make sense.
Well, some people have asked, are we Martians?
Oh, okay. Oh, so maybe they're
And I
not.
think
Maybe it wasn't a real question. Sorry, I think they're just throwing me, throwing me through. Oh, thanks, guys.
it's the
I think
beer
they're just having a
talking.
bit of Christmas fun. I'll
One,
get you.
if we proceed a little bit further, by the way, we have found what looks as though the ruins of a city at the base of the pyramid in Cydonia.
Yeah.
If you go down, there's Cydonian City, and you can see these long walls sort of arrangements wrapping around a small ridge. And
Okay.
that is apparently the ruins of a Martian city that may have housed 1 million people.
So have you working backwards, John, have you come to any conclusion about, what that civilization might have been, whether it would have been human or what might have been going on all those 500 or 250 million years ago there? I mean, can you
It
speculate?
looks, based on carvings that they made of what look like human faces, it looks like they were quite human in appearance.
And are you referring to the Olmec kind of look?
Yes, Olmec heads, and I think I did send one
Okay.
picture, 17,
Yeah.
of the Olmec heads, and they look quite similar to the face in Cydonia. Here's a helmet with ornaments on it. It has a square frame around the face, which we found on the face in Cydonia. And of course, it has the facial features. And it shows it's also quite eroded. It's
Okay.
suffered some damage due to erosion, which
Yeah.
all artifacts on Earth suffer.
Yes.
So people have
Yes.
said, well, they expect to find something pristine, like it was carved by Michelangelo last year, and that's not what you're going to find. You're going to find eroded archaeology like you find on Earth. The one nice thing about Mars' atmosphere being blown off the planet so completely is that it tend to flash freeze and kind of preserve everything. We may even find, living, preserved mummified tissues of the people up on Mars.
Well,
You can
anything's
imagine
possible.
you can imagine if we go to Mars and I am right. By the way, as a scientist, I will tell you something, Joanne. I am used to being right.
Oh, are you?
Yes, I am. I have been right more often than I have been proven wrong, far more times.
What,
So I'm
what do your what
confident.
do your peers think of this hypothesis? I mean, I know you've presented papers. In fact, just run through some of the places where that you presented this because there've been
Oh,
quite a few
yes,
scientific meetings.
I presented it at a scientific meeting called the American Physical Society. It was received with great shock by the audience. I gave an oral presentation. I was bombarded with questions afterwards. No one questioned my evidence or my interpretation of it. They did ask, is there any other explanation for the xenon-129 and this pattern of radioactivity? And I said, I didn't know of any natural phenomenon that could create this. I presented this also at the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference, and it was received very positively in the sense that no one questioned my data or my methods of analysis. No one even questioned my interpretation. One person finally asked me, he said, well, did they do it to themselves or did somebody else do it? That was the main question.
What was your feeling about that?
Well, my hypothesis is that someone else did this to
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so we basically, um, with all that that implies about the nature of the universe, that the universe is a dangerous place. And unfortunately, we are very noisy people in the universe. We're basically holding a big rock concert here on Earth and broadcasting everything, all of our advertisements and political propaganda and news and everything to the rest of the universe. Um,
And you were talking about in your the life on Mars, and that's your website, which is lifeonmars.pub, as you mentioned. And I was just looking at an article that I think you drew my attention to before, called "Evidence of a Massive Thermonuclear Explosion on
yes,
Mars in the Past,"
the data's
and it's called the subtitle of the Cydonia Hypothesis and Fermi's Paradox. And this is what you're referring to now, this noise element.
paradox. The fact that we now know every star has planets, basically.
Yeah.
And the universe is awash in the stuff of life, water, amino acids, methane, ammonia. Everywhere we look in the space, we see evidence of those things which we know help form the stuff of life on Earth. There are planets, there are suns, there is all the fertile things for life. And yet, the universe is very quiet. It's like a ghost town out there. It brings to mind a scene in the old movie Flash Gordon, made by the Laurentis, and Max von Sydow, obviously enjoying himself tremendously, played Ming the Merciless, and he says to Flash Gordon and Dale Arden, Dr. Zarkov, he says, "Foolish Earthlings, if you had any idea about the true nature of the universe, you would have hidden from it in terror. Instead, you come charging out in your spaceships." He said, it was a great line, and but it may be true. The universe, we already know the universe is dangerous. Asteroids, comets could come plowing into this planet and destroy human life, causing the life on Earth to try and start over and make something intelligent. But at the same time, it could be there are other dangers in the universe from other people like us. The Daleks, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go. The Daleks are out there. And that is a possibility none of us likes to think about, but on Mars, we may be face to face literally with it.
Yeah. John, you were saying at one point that you'd had some of your material removed, as far as you're aware, by NASA from a site.
Oh yes. Well, we gave a quite magnificent paper at the Case for Mars 2 site, and all record of it has been expunged.
Okay. And that's a NASA removed
hallucination we all had. The people we are dealing with are not even very artful in some of their attempts to suppress this. In fact, we've come to understand there's a great deal of money involved in all of this. Grants, future probes. The main tension in our own space program is between Pasadena and Houston. Pasadena, California, and Houston, Texas.
So you're saying that the Mars gravy train is far too big a wagon to be unhooked?
Absolutely. You have grasped it exactly.
Okay, so
Mars gravy train of billions of dollars, and if that train is diverted to Houston, Texas, where Johnson Space Flight Center is, meaning we're going to have American astronauts going to Mars. I've always recommended, by the way, that we tow along the entire space station consortium, so to make it international. And By the way, we have a Brit on the space station now, as I understand.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we do.
This is our first British astronaut is in
Yeah.
space, right? Well,
Yeah.
good to have you aboard. Good to have you along. And so we'll all head off to Mars together. And for some people, this idea of American astronaut space cowboys tromping around on Mars is just unthinkable. It's terrible. They don't want it to happen, and they want it. They view Mars as a giant academic sandbox that they can explore at their leisure with probes and robots, and that is true science. That sending people there and mucking up the place with habitats and bases and things is some kind of sacrilege, and I hold these people in great contempt, you know.
Right. So you definitely, it sounds like, don't believe that we've ever been there as humans.
No.
With any secret space program.
No.
No, you're not into that one. Okay.
John,
tell us.
You know, I was recently at a conference where they were they showed tapes of congressional hearings before our Congress, where Congress were asking the defense secretaries what had happened to all of this money that couldn't be accounted for, you know, like $1 trillion over 5 years. Enough to send, it was enough to send probes, humans to Mars several times over and build bases there. And the Pentagon seemed to just say, oh, well, we don't know what happened to the money. Please, let's change the subject. So there is a secret space program, we know. It
you do think so?
By satellites. We don't know what else it pays for, but I don't think we've been to Mars myself.
Okay.
My own opinion.
Well, just you know, talking about how
I do believe we've been to the moon, by the way.
You do, yes.
I do believe we've been to the moon, but not to Mars.
John, just tell us a little bit about what you experienced as you set about talking to some of the people that you were doing some research with or about. And I'm talking about people like John Lear. And John Lear is the pilot who went public, and whose father was the Lear aircraft designer, etc., who went public about Bob Lazar and all the UFO stuff. So tell us something about those events that when you were linking up there.
I went out to meet with John Lear and talk with him, and we had a very, very nice meeting, and it was very informative. Then I came back and I noticed that a car was following my car, and that people had pulled out this enormous camera with this long telephoto lens and were starting to take pictures of me. And they weren't wearing black, they were wearing brown, and it was a brown car. And it was the sort of car that if it ran over you and you woke up in the hospital and the police had asked you, what was the car? And you'd say, well, it was a brown car. It was, you know, it was a completely nondescript, ordinary car. And so I immediately reported this to the security person where I worked. And they reported to me that a car with lots of antennas on it had been waiting outside, apparently waiting outside our place of business, since I worked for a defense contractor. Had been waiting outside our business for several days and following me when I left.
Okay.
So I was the subject of a government investigation, apparently. I was never informed what this investigation was all about, but it had something to do with meeting with John Lear. So it was almost as if they wanted me to know that they were watching me. And
did you feel? Sorry, I was just going to say, did you feel that there was something to do with the MJ12 papers or a link there?
Oh, the MJ12 papers, incidentally, was kind of humorous because I received those in the mail, and so did some of my associates, and they were, I was quite stunned to open just an ordinary mail envelope and find all of these papers, marked classified in them. So I turned them into the local FBI office downtown in Washington, D.C., and they were terrified.
Really?
Showed them the papers and said that they had no classified facilities there to keep the papers safe, and that I would have to take them to yet another FBI office. And I informed them that I was not leaving the premises with the papers. And so they told me to call in the lot. They handed me a telephone and told me I should call another FBI office that would come and take custody of the papers. So I got on the phone, and this other FBI agent, this is all within the J. Edgar Hoover building downtown, and it was almost like something from Ghostbusters or something. I'm there. Here's all these very frightened-looking people behind this desk, looking at me as I'm talking to this other FBI office on the phone. And I said, "Well, I have these classified papers that were sent to me in the mail. It's a breach of security. I should turn them in. I'm supposed to do that. So I'm turning them in." And they told me to call you. And so this guy on the other end of the phone, he says, "What do the papers show?" And I said, "Well, they're marked, top secret and, magic and stuff like this." And magic, by the way, was the code name for the American program to break Japanese codes during World War II.
Okay.
And so what you discover in at least the U.S. intelligence services is they tend to recycle names of successful programs almost as for good luck. So yes, the MAGIC program in the beginning of World War II informed us 3 hours ahead of time that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked. But as was typical in Washington, D.C., they somehow could not warn Pearl Harbor even with 3 hours notice. So anyway, and of course it all turned out well. But anyway, that was a very successful program breaking the Japanese code. So here it is stamped all over these papers. And he says, "What do the papers talk about?" And I said, "Well, they talk about President Eisenhower and crashed UFOs and things." And he suddenly just said, "Oh, destroy them. Get rid of them." And I said, "I can't destroy classified work. I have to turn it into somebody." And he says, "We don't want them."
So
I said, by this time there was a lady standing next to me with a clipboard taking notes. So I turned to her with all these papers and dropped them right on her clipboard in front of her. And then I walked away holding my hands up saying, "I'm not taking these papers back. They're yours." And I walked out of the building feeling much better. And then,
do you know where they came from? Why you were sent them?
Distributed by a fellow named William Moore at a UFO conference. Several people did exactly what I did. They turned them into various agencies saying that classified information, U.S. defense classified information, was being spread around at this meeting. And they all got visits from the FBI. But the fellow who originally distributed them, named William Moore, never apparently suffered any investigation by the FBI. So this was some kind of government data release. It may have been disinformational, to make the Russians think that we were talking to UFO aliens and getting technology from them. There's always that possibility. But whatever happened was the FBI sent all my papers back to me with a note saying that laws over which they had jurisdiction did not appear to have been broken.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good news.
Rather comical, and but at the time it was quite frightening. I had never seen anything like this, and it tended to confirm all the rumors I had heard growing up. What the most serious rumor, by the way, is that the U.S. government entered into a contract pact with the devil, so to speak, with little gray aliens, and that this did not turn out well. They turned out to be very poor at holding up their end of the bargain, and we ended up with an armed battle in an underground base, a place called Dulce. So this is great stuff to put in a science fiction novel.
Yeah, well, I think we've got. You must know about Philip Schneider, who died for his
yes,
revealing, of course.
I remember hearing about what's called the Clash at Dulce.
Yeah.
This happened under the watch of Jimmy Carter, who already had a full plate with the Iran crisis and the war in the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. He was feeling quite overwhelmed already, and then apparently a bunch of military people marched into his office one day and announced that not only did UFO aliens exist, we had a treaty with them. The aliens had violated this treaty, and this resulted in a gun battle with large loss of life on both sides. So that things were, whatever deal we had with the aliens was over.
So, John, just let me get that clear. You've heard that somebody said this, or you're telling me the story as part of one of your books?
Oh,
sorry, just let me get that clear.
Well, Joanne, all I'm telling you is what I heard.
Oh, that's so. But you. What I'm saying is, it's not in your book, but you heard this as a.
We don't know what the truth is. I heard, for instance, 60 people got killed. Then I heard 40 people got killed. Then I heard 100 people got killed. And it was also in the tabloids. And at the time when I saw it, it was in the late 70s. I saw it in the tabloids and thought, isn't that peculiar? Why would we have a battle on the ground with aliens from outer space? And
well, underground, yeah. Yeah, and Phil Schneider was underground, yeah.
So, but I talked to several. John Lear said that he'd heard from reliable sources that this occurred. So all of my knowledge is secondhand. I just talked to several of the most serious investigators I could find in the UFO field. They said that everyone had heard this rumor.
Yeah.
So that they gathered collectively that something had happened. The exact details of it, no one could figure out, but something bad had happened in the, of course, this makes great things to write a novel around, so I'll just say that I put things like this into the novel. In the novel, after the UFO cover-up collapses, by the way, there is, of course, in the novel, there's a congressional inquiry as to how this could have happened. And the explanation is that the gray aliens insisted they were staunch anti-communists. So,
okay.
Of course, the U.S. government climbed into bed with them.
Well, you know what? It's a weird world, I'm telling you. John, just before we're to the end of our program, and thank you very much for being so entertaining as well. But just, I know we haven't talked much about your written material, but you've got one or two books out there. So, and I think we've got some images of them. So just run by the writings that you produced.
Well, the primary thing we've been talking about, the nuclear weapons on Mars, that's in Death on Mars. It's so that is for sale every place.
Yeah.
The book Death on Mars. Then there's also the science fiction novel Morning Star Pass: The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. And it does collapse in the novel. It's basically an exploration of everything I heard. And of course, finally you end up connecting the dots as a good writer. So anyway, they say it's good fun. It's very scary though. Don't read it at night.
Okay, so we've also got another one. There's Dead Mars and Dying Earth.
That's
and you've written that with Monica Paxson.
Yes, that is a wonderful book. We won an award for it. a silver medal for best environmental book. I also came and gave a talk at the College of Psychic Studies in
Oh,
London.
did you really?
Oh, yes, it was fabulous. We were very well
Wow.
treated. We were treated royally. And we
I-
came over and gave a talk on it and sold several boxes of books. And it was about global warming, basically.
Okay. All right. Well, the dead Mars and dying Earth.
Yeah, well, it was basically the idea that Mars was Earth-like in the past, and something bad happened to it, and we don't want Earth to become like Mars, basically. So we
Okay.
must take better care of this planet. Then I also wrote a book called Life and Death on Mars, and that was about Mars science, the science of Mars being Earth-like in the past with a biosphere.
Okay. And then we've got Beyond Einstein's Unified Field, Gravity and Electromagnetism Redefined.
Yes, that's my work on unified field, which is progressing nicely. And
Okay.
so that I'm going to have another book come out about that in this next year. It'll be highly technical, though. It'll be mostly equations.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure some of our lot here can cope with that, actually. There's some very...
They can. But basically, it turns out the Tesla rotating field, electromagnetic field, is why you see 3 bumps on the bottom of most UFOs. They have a 3-phase rotating field, just like induction motors in industry on Earth.
Okay.
So that is why they have 3 bumps on the bottom.
All right. Well, that doesn't mean a lot to me, but I'm sure it will to most other people.
Well, next time you see a UFO, notice it has 3 bumps on the bottom, or it's a triangle. So I understand that now.
Okay. All right. Well, I shall pay more attention and have a look at all of that stuff. So, John, I just want to say thank you very much indeed. It's been great, and I've learned a bit more, and I need to learn a lot more. And I look forward to hearing any further information that you come up with about all of this Mars and the, this bomb business. If you come up with any more evidence, do let me know, and we'll have you on to talk about it at another time.
That would be wonderful. Well, I would just like to say it's been a great honor to be on your show, and I would also like to say, may God bless and save the United Kingdom.
Oh, well, thank you very much. People's Internet Radio is hosted over in Ireland as well, and I know you are part Irish.
And also the whole Kingdom of Ireland, or rather Republic.
Okay, my dear. Well, listen, thank you very much indeed. And we are coming to the end of our show. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
And John and Stephen. And thanks, everybody in the chat room. Yes. I hope you were having a nice time. It looked like you were having a good joke or two. So I hope that was fun. So thanks very much, John and Stephen. And we are over and out here at the penultimate show of the Ammach Files on the 22nd of December, 2015. Good night, good morning, and thank you. Ammach Files. Hello and good evening to everybody. It is the 22nd of December. Can you believe it? I should have put my party hat on, but I do have my Christmas earrings on. So this is program 62 of the Ammach Files. And as you know, this is peoplesinternetradio.com. And I have the wonderful Stephen Roberts helping me get this all out to you. So thank you very much, Stephen. Now, my guest tonight is the plasma physicist, Dr. John Brandenburg. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment or two. But thank you very much for joining us again. So, as you know, we've made it just a little bit after 11. Gosh, we're getting good at this. So, just to pick up on things, Ammach, I wanted to just let you know that this is, in fact, the penultimate Ammach Files. Oh, I can hear the violins going and a big tear dropping there. But it is the last of, next week will be the last incarnation of me as the Ammach Files and the work I've been doing under that banner. Now, the reason for this is manifold, and some of you I have already explained in part on the show before. And it's essentially because the Ammach Files, the Ammach website got absolutely hacked to Hades, so that had to come down. The archive of it will be out there in due course, and next week I will reveal to you my new incarnation. So whilst the Ammach Files will be ending, after next week, I am going to take a little break from broadcasting, and I'm not sure how long that will be, but be sure I will be back, as they say. So I want to tell you, also share with you about the event that happened on Saturday. By that, then please send an email to amash@hotmail.co.uk. The things like the email will still be used for a while, but from the end of this month, there will be another email which I will give out next week, and also give you a little look behind the curtain at what is going on with the next phase of my development as the phoenix from the ashes, rising for another phase of development in my research with things that have been Ammach. But for now, I want to introduce you to Dr. John Brandenburg before we bring him on and before we play his song, which will be Lunatic Fringe with Red Rider. But so let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. John Brandenburg. He is a plasma physicist, as I said, and he did his graduate work at California at Lawrence Livermore National Labs in controlled plasma for fusion power. He's also worked in defense energy and space research, so quite a diverse background. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, where we discovered water at the moon's poles, excuse me. The focus of Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two range forces of nature, gravity and electromagnetism. There is evidence, he says, also for two, and this is our point of focus today, of two massive nuclear explosions on Mars that occurred above the Martian surface, and they were airbursts, turning large areas of the planet's surface into glass and leaving radioactive byproducts, which are still visible, he's reported. So we're going to talk about that and an awful lot more with the Cydonia Hypothesis, with Dr. John Brandenburg, right after Red Riders and Lunatic Fringe, which is, I think, probably quite apposite. Now, it starts off quite quietly, folks, so it's not that we've forgotten to turn it on. Be with you in just 3.5 minutes and we'll be back. Thanks for that. So hello and welcome back to the last of the Ammach Files before Christmas and the penultimate one of the series. And I have with me Dr. John Brandenburg. John, welcome to the Ammach Files. How are you?
Well, great honor, Joanne. Thank you so much.
John, just tell us where you are. I haven't told people where you are in the world.
I am in the middle of the Midwest, actually the
Okay.
north of the Midwest, in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okie dokie.
We're having a very warm winter here.
Yeah, we are here too. Very, very wet, I might say. I normally do a little forecast and say how the weather's been. It's been absolutely windy and horrible, and hence the hair.
Well, here we're having a very bizarre warm winter, and since I am a strong proponent that we must mend our ways and reduce our greenhouse emission gases, I tend to worry every time I see the weather doing something strange nowadays.
Well, I have one or
I'm
two
a political conservative, by the way, and I believe in global warming.
Well, I have some friends who absolutely believe.
Is that?
Sorry, John, I was just going to say I have some friends who absolutely believe that as they observe the activity of HAARP and the output of HAARP, so the weather changes. So they are really sure that with all the HAARP configurations around the planet, that's what it's to do with. So, but anyway, that's another story.
I'll tell you about the time I interviewed for a job at HAARP.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes. I asked them what it was for. And the answer I got was, we have all this natural gas in Alaska. It'd be a shame to just burn it off. We should use it for something.
Oh, well, but they have harbs everywhere. I mean, Norway and anyway, around the planet. So
Oh,
it's
yes, yes. Oh, you ought to see the Russian one out in Siberia. It's absolutely
the 19th. It was a wonderful, though small and cozy affair. And it was the Ammach kind of end of year do. And one of the things I'd like to do is just do a shout out to Charmaine. Charmaine was one of the people attending, and just to say well done, because Barbara Lamb, along with her co-author Miguel Mendonça, have co-authored a book in which she features. Charmaine was on the show some many months back, and their book, which is newly published, I think it's out on Amazon, it's called Meet the Hybrids. So it is just out after about 8 months' work, and I think all of the participants, I think there, as I said, there are 8, I think they all did work with Barbara on the regression side. So this is breaking new ground in as much it is a book totally about hybrids. For those who are interested, you can go over and have a look at their work. So I think this is absolutely fantastic. And what else is really interesting that may come from hearing about Miguel's background is that I'm very interested in the ecology also of what's going on, not only on the planet, but also how the ET interaction impacts our ecology long term and where that takes us. And Miguel's background is in ecology, so I'm hoping that he is going to pick up that ball and run with that and put some material together, some research material that will actually explore that, and that definitely will be a first. So it was really exciting. We are, out of that little meeting as well, came a bit of a project. Now I'm just going to call it project, and it's going to sound funny, Purple Party. Now Project Purple Party, if people are interested in this, it's some energy work, and it's to do with energy work on the planet and for the planet. And it's very specific work, and it will be involving groups around specifically, initially anyway, the UK. And if any of you guys are piqued with your interest.
Surreal to see how large it is.
I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. So, John, perhaps you'd sort of indulge me and allow us to explore, as we did in our pre-show chat, something of your interest in the field. Not only, well, let's start with the UFO thing, because you were interested as a youngster in things UFO and somewhat ET. But tell us why.
Well, you must understand, in the United States, we were just bombarded with stuff about flying saucers and UFO. I was born in 1953, so all of my youth was dominated with news of UFOs and sightings and things like the Twilight Zone. I was watching some old, very fine episodes from there, and they featured flying saucers and UFOs constantly. So it was and it was also a time during the Cold War, so the military in this country was doing all sorts of things and not really telling the public what they were up to. So it led to a lot of confusion. The Air Force was launching these rockets full of an element called barium into the low Earth orbit and setting them off. They would make big explosions, and they would make these big green comets moving across the sky. And everyone would see them, and it would get reported in the newspapers, and then there would be this long wait for an explanation from somebody, and none would be forthcoming. The U.S. government figured if they wanted to do something, it was nobody's business what they were doing. And but there were a lot of UFO, honest to God, UFO sightings in Oregon, where I grew up. I saw a quite spectacular one over my town. It was reported in the paper. Everyone else saw it too. And it was during the same period, I think it was 1967, where they were seeing what were the great swamp cast sighting